You're the perfect blend of elegance and style, and your ride should be no different. The 2024 Hyundai Sonata Hybrid meets all your needs, from business to brunch and everywhere in between. With head-turning details like a sleek front end, plus stylish interior, and an available 12.3-inch digital instrument cluster and seamless tech integration. Okay, Hyundai. Visit HyundaiUSA.com to learn more about the new 2024 Hyundai Sonata Hybrid.
Today on CityCast Portland, we're asking, why did the city just give a crucial permit to the controversial Zenith Energy fuel terminal, even though there's widespread opposition from climate activists and a good chunk of city council? We'll also dive into a very food-centric mailbag and hear your takes on Portland pizza, donuts, and much more. Joining me on this midweek news roundup is our very own senior producer, Giulia Fiaoni. It's Wednesday, February 5th. I'm executive producer John Notarianni, in for Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. Welcome, everyone, to the midweek microdose of news. Giulia, thanks for being here.
Hello, good morning.
So for all the newbies out there, this is a day that we take a minute to catch up on some of the stories that you might have missed over the course of the week. It's also the time that we like to dig into our listener mailbag and hear from all of you. Giulia, today we're talking about a story that's come up a lot on the show, but there's a new wrinkle in it, a pretty big one. Yeah. We're talking about Zenith Energy. Let's call them Portland's greatest frenemy. There's been an ongoing back and forth about this company, and they want to stick around in Portland, but a lot of people don't want them to. What's going on?
Gosh. Thank you for that intro. I love that frenemy nickname. I will say I'm going to get into a little bit of the weeds in the background and then toss it back to you for this update that we're teasing to. Mm-hmm. But Zenith Energy is a Texas-based fossil fuel storage company that stores and moves renewable and fossil fuels via train, ships, and pipelines across the U.S. And it's also one of the largest operators in the CEI hub, or Critical Energy Infrastructure Hub, in Northwest Portland's Linton neighborhood, right on the Willamette River. And this is where 11 different companies like Shell and Chevron store and transfer hundreds of millions of gallons of toxic chemicals in a 6-mile stretch of hundreds of massive fuel tanks.
Yeah, lots of things we don't want to go into the river, right next to the river.
Oh, yes. And I'm going to get into a little bit of those stakes. So the reason why people have been talking about the hub for years is due to where it's located and its flimsy 1950s, not very natural disaster-proof design. In the case of any sort of major earthquake, train derailment, or even just neighboring forest fire, that shit can blow up. So millions of gallons of chemicals spilling into the Willamette, toxic fumes, entire communities destroyed, you name it. But the main thing is 90% of Oregon's fuel passes through that hub. So that means essential services in disaster recovery that rely on fuel, like any sort of transportation, emergency medical services. Literally all the jet fuel that PDX relies on for air travel will be severely impacted and even offline, which would make things so much worse. But all of that being said, sorry for the morning midweek doom and gloom. Zenith specifically comes up a lot because it's not only one of the largest operators, but it's the only company where none of the supplies transferred through and stored at the hub goes to Oregonians. So it all goes to other states, all the risk and literally no reward when it comes to resources. And on top of that, historically, Zenith has been one of the most difficult companies to work with regarding local and federal regulation. They've done construction work at the site without permits, a lot of illegal closed-door lobbying with the city, alongside illegal use of certain hub docks for operations. So as a whole, activists, neighborhood groups, and politicians and stuff have been working for years at every level, from city to federal, to try to manage the potential risks, which brings us to the most recent update. So companies like Zenith need an updated air quality permit for Oregon's Department of Environmental Quality, or DEQ, to continue operating into the future. but they also need some approval from the city first to even get there.
Yeah, so they need to get this new approval from the DEQ, and part of that package is that they need to have basically like a land use permit from the city to be able to do it. And this is something that's been in the works for a while, and the city staffers that are, the people that check these boxes have said in the past, like, look, we can have all sorts of disagreements about this thing, but in this very specific instance, it looks like they can check the boxes, so they should be able to get this permit.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of the city councilors don't want this approval to go through. I mean, in the last election, we saw plenty of city councilors really making this a campaign issue.
Yeah.
And last Friday, 2 of our city councilors actually tried to jump into the fray and delay this entire process. So Mitch Green from District 4, which is where this hub is, and Angelita Murillo, who's from District 3, which is sort of like Central East Side, they tried to delay this approval by putting out a draft resolution asking for a couple things. They asked the mayor to investigate violations that Zenith has had in the past, and to ask city council members to investigate whether city staff had made what they call willful false statements during a recent work session when they talked about this project.
Wow.
And to put communications between the city and Zenith on the public record. And all of this would also kind of pause opening new permits pending all of these investigations, which is pretty crazy. Like that is a new move that we haven't seen from city council very much, right?
Yeah, it just makes you wonder that for big deal issues like this, maybe it shouldn't just be status quo, check the permitting box, move it on to the next thing. Because ultimately that's what keeps these very risky things in business, are those practices, and taking away the opportunity for folks that Portlanders voted into office to make a thoughtful decision about something that affects literally everybody.
Yeah, well, I think councilors Angelita and Mitch would agree with you. I think certain city staffers would not, because that all happened on Friday. Then on Monday, the city came through and said, nah, we're going to approve it. So they approved the land use credential for Zenith Energy on Monday. And of course, environmental activists are up in arms about it. It does get Zenith one step closer to getting the approval that it needs from the state to be able to continue operating in the city.
Yeah, I actually have a quote from one of the leaders of the Linton Neighborhood Association, who that neighborhood will be the most impacted by something terrible happening at the hub, and also just deals with most of the toxic gas releases regularly. She's also a leader of Tank the Tanks, which is an activism group. But Nancy Heiser said, quote, "Linton's disappointment with city administrators is unfortunately not new. We, along with the majority of Portlanders, voted for the change the charter brought, an expanded city council that promised better representation, transparency, and responsiveness. We strongly support the council testimony and actions that provided their commitment to those promises. Today, we feel betrayed."
Yeah. And it is just such an interesting conflict, right, between all these new city council members really wanting to make a change and of sort of coming up against the limits of what they can do in their role,
Yeah.
And, there is still more on the horizon, right? Like city council is planning to discuss this in March at a work session. But, this feels like the first major test of what this new city council can do. And it does look like, status quo wins.
Well, also, even what the mayor can do, because this was one of Mayor Keith Wilson's campaign items right on his website. And he has expressed support of making sure that the CEI hub is in a much better position than it is right now. So even he can't really do anything right now with this permit-specific approval process.
Yeah, he put out a quote saying that this is, quote, a narrowly defined procedural step that determines whether certain activities can occur according to existing land use regulations. I am not in a position to impede this administrative determination.
That's like a dictionary definition of permit approval process. Oh my gosh. Yeah, wow. There's a lot going on here.
Well, Giulia, you've been following this pretty closely. You've been covering it for the show. Like, where do you think this goes from here? Do you have any idea?
I think when it comes to all that goes on with the CEI hub, things typically move pretty slow because there are so many layers of regulation and management. So I can't imagine even this piece of the pie to move very quickly, which is great for folks who are hoping to change things before that final stamp of approval, and probably very frustrating for companies like Zenith. So I think it's just more to come.
Poor Zenith.
Poor Zenith and Chevron.
I hate to like get into the position of what's the other side of this here. Like this sort of energy is really important. And I get that, like the idea of being like, well, we'll just pick it all up and move it 200 miles to the east isn't really an easy viable solution.
Wait, John,
either.
Did you watch SpongeBob growing up?
I didn't. No, I didn't.
Or even at all, because we grew up in a different era. There's this whole episode. I'm just going to say this for listeners who know what I'm talking about. Patrick Star is going off on a rant about moving Bikini Bottom to a different area in order to save them from a gigantic monster coming to tear up the town.
Okay.
And the quote is, "We'll just take Bikini Bottom and move it over there." And I feel like that's literally what we're asking to do with the CEI hub. And it's a lot more complicated than that.
Well, what happened? Did they move Bikini Bottom? Did it work out?
They did move Bikini Bottom as a combined, like, physical body community effort shifting the city. And it's a funny metaphor for what's going on here because the reality is, like, even stopping Zenith doesn't take care of the whole issue. I think the bigger long-term vision is to make it so that all of these resources aren't in one place because we're creating this, like, disaster scenario where we are leaving ourselves without support if something were to go wrong that we have no control over.
Yeah.
So this is like a decades-long issue that we're talking about here, but it does take small steps to even start to address it.
Well, Mayor Wilson, if you're listening, I know you're looking for like fresh, outside the box ideas. I think SpongeBob has got it. I think that this like might be the way forward for Portland. We're happy to help.
We're going to link to that in the show notes.
Okay. All right, Giulia, let's take a quick break. And then when we come back, let's open up the mailbag.
You know what's smart? Enjoying a fresh gourmet meal at home that you didn't have to cook. Meet Factor, your loophole in the laws of mealtime. Chef-crafted meals delivered with a tap, ready in just 2 minutes. You know what's even smarter? Treating yourself without cheating your goals. Factor is dietitian approved, chef prepared, and you plated. Pretty smart, huh? Refresh your routine and eat smart with Factor. Learn more at factormeals.com.
We weren't trying to come up with a theme for this mailbag, but it seems like our listeners and readers felt differently because we are talking almost exclusively about food for the next 10 minutes or so.
Yes.
Specifically, we're going to be talking a lot about tavern-style pizza, which, like, I don't know that I've ever had a stance on the show that has been so roundly rebuked by the audience. So recently on a midweek roundup, we got into a conversation with our colleague Brian Vance about Midwest tavern-style pizza. And I went on the record as not being a big fan of tavern-style pizza. But everybody disagrees with me. Apparently, everyone loves tavern-style pizza. Okay, Chris wrote in. I totally agree with Brian's gripe that Portland has an abundance of pizza, but is a desert for tavern pizza fans. Chris recommends Cerveza on Killingsworth. They say the pizza is dynamite, $14 a pie, so you're not going to go broke on it. So that's one. Bryna wrote in, has the same complaint as Brian. Mrs. Tavern-style pizza recommends Bridge City pizza. Okay. So that's two. Jason also has dismay of the lack of tavern-style pizza, recommends Proof Pizza. It's a food cart in a pod at the Breakside Brewing location in Beaverton. And Nick wrote in, also recommending Proof Pizza in Beaverton.
Yeah.
So, Giulia, I am clearly on the wrong side of history on this one.
You know, I have to break it to you, John. I don't think I've ever had tavern-style pizza.
Yeah.
I can't even get on a side on this one. I'm like, well, first I got to try it, and then I'm probably going to be on Brian's side. But
yeah, well, Portland has spoken. Brian, you win this round. Thanks for all the notes, you guys.
Okay, well, thanks for that pizza roundup, John. I have a note from a listener named Joshua. They're actually talking about our midweek roundup episode from a couple weeks ago, where we announced that one of the previous commissioners, Renee Gonzalez, is now working as general counsel for the trucking and gas company, Jubitz. They were quoting back to us how we pointed out that sadly, Jubitz might be the only 24-hour restaurant in North Portland, but Joshua hasn't been in ages, and they're reminding us not to forget about Javier's Tacos on North Lombard near the Woodlawn neighborhood. They don't have waffles, but it has to be better than Renee's Jubitz. And I will say, Joshua, I hear you, but I think I'm a Jubitz fan. I went there one time because my partner played a show, and I think I really dig the setup of having like a hotel and a mini market and a laundromat and a post office and a whole country venue and a restaurant and a bar. It's wild. It's like, I've never been to anything like it. So I think it has my heart.
And, you know, there are like country bars in Portland that are kind of like indie rock, kind of hipster country bars.
Yeah.
The country bar at Jubitz is a country bar.
It's kind of a rite of passage for that genre. I think like Keith Urban played there once or something.
What's her name? Casey Musgraves played there.
Oh, yeah.
When she was on her way up. I think. I said that on the show before. If I'm wrong, I'm like spreading false rumors, but I'm pretty sure that Casey Musgraves played there.
We get the sentiment. It's a spot to go. People love it. But I have another note from a listener from a different episode that we did last week. This was in reference to our episode with comedian Jay Fluelling about their current Portland gripes. And naturally, voodoo came up and was deeply unpopular. But I think this listener's got a point. This is from an anonymous listener because they don't want the flack. It's, quote, "You know I love you all and everything you do, but after today's beatdown of voodoo donuts, I feel the need to comment, not because I appreciate their donuts, but they deserve a shout out for sticking it in downtown. A lot of more well-funded businesses were enriched by a downtown they abandoned. Voodoo deserves some recognition, even praise for their perseverance, the kind that saves the city." Which I've never really thought about it like that before.
I see their point. I mean, I do think voodoo has had some like pretty ugly labor issues as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
We very rarely get a note that somebody wants to contribute anonymously. And this was one that ended with "please withhold name." So
yes, please
we
withhold
see
name.
you, we hear you. But like, you also know, you know what
I
you're
like
saying.
a fresh take. I'll say that.
It's a fresh
I like
take.
a fresh take.
So I have another note that is directed. I don't know why I'm catching so many strays in this mailbag, but this comes from an episode where I got into sort of discussing my very picky taste in Middle Eastern food, particularly about falafel and hummus. Robert wrote in, "John said he hadn't found falafel or hummus to his standards. Has he been to Nicholas? A Portland institution with dynamite hummus, in my opinion, or maybe just not to his standards." Well, Robert, I have been to Nicholas. I am a fan of Nicholas up to a point. I just got my sort of like hard baked in hummus and falafel opinions. And like, it's okay. Portland is not a hummus town. Portland makes a lot of other great food. It doesn't need to be able to do everything. And I forgive Portland for not being a hummus town. That's all I want to say. That's all
I get you, John. Everybody has their thing depending on where they came from.
Mm-hmm.
I spent a lot of time growing up in Los Angeles area, and I just don't really ever get tacos here because I'm still looking for like that alleyway street taco from downtown LA.
Yeah.
And it's not because people aren't doing good stuff out here. It's just not what I crave, I guess.
I wonder if somebody out there has like the Portland taco that's going to make a Californian happy. If you have it, we want to know. All right, Giulia, finally, one more. We got a couple notes based in your apparently ambivalent goal to go on lots of morning runs. How's that going, by the way?
It is. I'm realizing it is a little ambivalent. So just to defend myself first before I get into this, I did set a goal to start going on morning runs, and I was going to create my run routes near local bakeries because I want to try more bakeries. I want to run in the morning. But I did come to terms with the fact that I don't usually get up very early and I don't usually go outside as soon as I get up. So to be kind to myself, I was like, hey, I'm just going to start with walks. and I'm going to walk a couple miles in the morning, and eventually I'll be able to run to make it far enough to get to these bakeries. And I'm realizing I kind of like walking better. I really enjoy just the pace of getting to notice all these like little neighborhood quirks that I probably wouldn't notice if I ran. Maybe this is an excuse, but this is a work in progress. So I'm going to read a couple notes from folks.
I'm just imagining you running so fast that everything is a blur. Your eyes can't focus with
That's what I'm anticipating. You don't know what I'm capable of, John, okay? So this next note is from listener Emily. And they said, I feel silly writing this, but I just listened to the January episode and I was so happy to hear about Giulia's running to bakeries goal because I definitely did that in my 20s while I was living in San Francisco. Their roommates made fun of them, but they thought it was such a delight when they would pass someone who they knew was impressed by their efforts running in the morning, even though they knew that they were just steps away from a chocolate croissant. So they had the same approach. And I will say I did have an email exchange with Emily. I told them about my walking strategy and they strongly supported it. So thank you, Emily.
I also want to point out that in that email, Emily said, also, Giulia is the best.
Oh, no. Giulia. I left that out. Anyway, this brings us to our last note. This is from listener Ashley, who's pretty stoked on my walking strategy, I must say. And they said, you've got to pick up the book Portland Hill Walks by Laura O. Foster. The book maps out about 20 walks across Portland, each 3 to 5 miles in distance with elevation gain. And they take you to unique or enchanting neighborhoods of Portland, directing you up staircases and secret alleyways to discover Portland's history. It sounds fantastic. There's lines about old trolleys and amusement parks and the reason why things are the way they are. And she had said that it would reshape how I see Portland, which this seems to be kind of what I'm on. I almost feel like I need to like shift my goal to be this instead of running. But maybe it's just that. Maybe I just ultimately want to see Portland more by foot.
Yeah, this sounds like Giulia catnip.
Right?
This is like exactly. Laura O. Foster somehow knew you and wrote the book for you.
Seriously. Yeah. It's funny that I'm just hearing about it for the first time. And then what's funny is that Laura also has another book called Portland Stairwalks, which is a similar concept, but related to specific staircases around the city.
Have you gotten your hands on a copy yet?
I haven't yet. I think this will be the thing that I look for next when I'm perusing around Powell's, like I do semi-regularly. Mm-hmm. But I just want to say thank you to Ashley and Emily for being so invested in this goal. I think it's been motivating when I'm out in the mornings, and I'll have to just continue updating y'all.
Yeah. Well, I want to say we have gotten a ton of mail from you, and thank you so much. It actually was hard to edit it down for this episode because there were so many great emails that we wanted to include. So we might try and get some of those in future episodes as well. And we always want to hear what you think. So whatever takes you have, if you think we're right or if you think I'm wrong.
Especially if you think John's wrong.
Portland@citycast.fm. Shoot us an email. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes, please write in.
All right. Well, Giulia, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, have a good rest of the week, John.
Yeah, it's not like we're not going to see each other in a meeting in 10 minutes. So.
No, don't talk about that. Thanks.
Well, that's all for us today here on CityCast Portland. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend or leave us a rating or a review? Claudia will be back tomorrow with much more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.